Hi, my name is Sophia Farzana. I'm the co-director and co-founder of Scottish Ethnic Minority Autistics. I am late diagnosed autistic ADHDR. I'm a teacher, a trainer, a mother. I am Pakistani and I'm also visibly Muslim.
Thanks so much, Sophia. I'm Olivia Nathan, and I'm a trainer at SEMA. I'm of Iraqi heritage, and I'm the firstborn in the UK. I'm also autistic late diagnosed. I'm a trainer, a conflict mediator, and a singer.
Nice. So this webinar is all about our identities as racialized autistic people in Scotland. And I have to give credit to this beautiful picture that we have here, which comes from some of our stories that we've been listening to from our communities. And this one signifies how we feel like we are in a place without directions or without a map, and how we feel lost given our identities and where we are in our environments.
And who did the picture?
It's our very own in-house autistic ADHD artist called Hosna Hussain.
She's great.
We've got a few of her artwork that we're going to be featuring in our presentations and also hopefully in our ebook as well.
And what's our webinar about?
So this one is about exploring our identities and intersectionality.
And we've got a few more webinars as well, don't we?
Yeah, and we've got one on education, then on employment, and then womanhood.
So this is the first one. So make sure you watch this and then you can catch up on the others.
Yeah, we
We've
will
got
be
enough.
reminding people to come back to watch this before. It's like a prerequisite for the other webinars.
Okay, friends, we're going to turn off our videos. You can listen to it as a podcast, but we recommend that you watch along on our beautiful slides.
So the PowerPoint will be available with all the hyperlinks as a PDF in the captions of our video on YouTube.
Great. The topics we'll cover today will explore what being autistic and being racialised, black, brown, or other than the white Scottish majority can mean. We'll talk about the notion of privilege and have some participation with you in that. We'll look at the social model of disability and microaggressions, and we'll discuss legislation globally and in Scotland and what that means for us.
I could never understand why I felt out of place. This is a quote from Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edulodge. The reason why we picked this quote from this book was because it echoed quite a lot of the sentiment that we were hearing from the people we were listening to with the lived experience exercise. It's unfortunate that a lot of white people don't see the prevalence of structural racism and its symptoms. Lodge's sentiment in this book is felt like this because of the gulf of emotional disconnect when a person of color talks about their experiences and what it's like being around white people.
Suppose you're watching and as someone who doesn't experience racism and is not autistic. In that case, this webinar is our way to help you feel and connect empathically and educationally so that this gulf Lodge refers to can begin to close. We can move more deeply to dismantle structural racism and ableism within ourselves, our workplaces, and our wider communities. It's important to note that while there will be patterns of experiences, everyone is a unique individual with their circumstance and intersection of characteristics. Some black and brown people find themselves in environments free of racism. Some autistic people don't experience ableism, but far too many do. So we're here to try and help reduce that.
Our goals and purpose of this training webinar is to help you recognize how systemic barriers affect racialized autistics. It's also to help embed statutory requirements in services and care and adapt services based on needs of individuals. Now, why is this important? SEMA was created on the back of a lack of support for racialized autistic people a few years ago. And it's because any support that was there for autistic people was very white-centric. It's taken a long time for us to get to where we are, but if you look at the context in Scotland, 8.9% of the Scots coming from the 22 census show that 8.9% of us are from minority ethnic group. Then we've got the number of autistic people, it's said to be around 1%. However, we know within our own autistic community that this number is far higher because of the barriers to access diagnosis and support, and also to recognize that we are autistic people. For example, myself and Olivia, we both said that we were late diagnosed or late discovered autistic people. There will be many, many people like us. Within Scottish Ethnic Minority Autistics remit, in the past year, we have managed to speak to and listen to and support 42 adult autistic people, but many more carers of autistic young people and children. And to look at the list of our different minority, our different ethnicities, it shows that we're not a homogeneous group, meaning that we have different needs, and these are not catered for within policy, within services, for public services, for or third sector.
So you watching this might be familiar with the protected characteristics that are in the Equalities Act, and you might be very familiar with the scene of inequality. But I just set the scene that we live in a world which holds gross inequalities, and that we're all biased and have been socialized into acting out these bias. And if it's not our behavior, it could be the structures around us. The 9 protected characteristics are protected by law because people who have these characteristics often face disadvantages in life due to these biases and as part of the existence of structural inequality. Inequality can show up between people as harmful attitudes, biases, and prejudice, or at an institutional level where policies and procedures have inherited gaps, leaving people vulnerable to discrimination. Indeed, structural inequality, like racism, can be described following the words of D'Angelo as collective bias that is backed by legal authority and institutional control, and this can be implicit or explicit.
What do we mean by this exactly? Well, women in a patriarchal society have inherited a history that we are long owned by men, and despite efforts including the Equality Pay Act, we are still far away from economic equality. White women got the vote in 1918, yet looking at 100 years on the present day, despite there being more women than men in the UK population, 40%, only 40% of the House of Commons is made up of women, while 60% men. Looking at the House of Lords, of all the members, under 29% are female, leaving 71% male. Of those, the majority being, of course, white. We also know that in Scotland, there are more monuments and statues of animals or to animals than they are of women. Have you actually noticed that? I didn't notice that until recently.
Mm-hmm.
There's more animals than women.
I
Okay.
know. And we can see by this that these systems of inequality are not fluid and responsive. Cultural change takes time. Similarly, discrimination protection due to someone's race or ethnicity is also technically protected by law because slavery and colonialism happened. And there are consequences from that time, including employment discrimination, educational discrimination, police violence, housing segregation, bias, media, etc. And sadly, many of you may have heard the 2019 statistic that Black women are 4 times as likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth than white women in the UK. And we can go through each of the protected characteristics and see how there is a legacy and current practice in society that's left these people at a disadvantage, including, and of course, disabled people. In our case, we're focusing on the barriers faced by people who suffer racism and who are autistic.
Now, bringing this closer to home, I mentioned bias. More specifically, we're talking about unconscious bias or implicit bias. I wish for you to consider the question, what have you been taught? And how does that compare to what you believe? Now, taking this further, reflect on what you think you believe, but in reality, what you find that you believe as a result of what you have been taught. Let's break this down. Can you recall the first time you learned that the concept of race was something of meaning? What did that mean? How did it feel? Who was impacted? How did that impact the way you thought about race and from the moment you encountered it? Now, this is a really important journey that we want our viewers to embark on as part of the professional development. In ways of working towards equality and equity, we have to first unlearn what we know or what we think we know and what we believe. So unlearning is first part of the process before we can start relearning.
Mhm. And that takes us to the privilege wheel. So building on the protected characteristics, it's built on the evidence that there are systems of power in the majority sphere that advantage people with certain characteristics and discriminate others. And certainly when focusing on Scotland, we believe that the privilege wheel here applies. Please know that if you're watching this, that the privilege wheel can be triggering or activating for some, as it can be a hard reality to face. At the same time, it's not absolute, and certainly is not the case across the globe and across all communities.
Mm.
The privilege wheel here can be helpful in illustrating, certainly in mainstream society in Scotland, how privilege and power is patterned across these characteristics as a general rule. This is in the context of the history of colonialism and white power and does not speak to other forms of power that you might know, connect to, and celebrate. Women's power, the power of the feminine approach, anti-capitalist approach, etc. We're complex people with overarching hierarchies of power within systems of norms that hold up and perpetuate inequalities along certain identity fault lines. How identity influences relationship and life outcomes is unique for all of us.
So next wheel here, and it is not exhaustive, this one here. You have different versions of it. In this particular one, I think it's important for us to acknowledge our privilege. So Olivia, I'm going to invite you here, and I'm also going to, as a demonstration for our audience, acknowledge our privilege here.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, I'll go first. I am a citizen of where I was born, although my parents were migrants. I was educated in this country from the beginning, from primary and secondary, and also I'm lucky to be educated at tertiary level as well. And I've got a postgraduate degree. I speak English fluently, although sometimes I feel like I'm bilingual with the way I process English. My figure, if you want to look at body size, is average. My mental health can fluctuate. Some points I'm really, really good, but other times I'm fluctuating regarding, well, in response to life events and things that's happened within family. I am straight, and I'm able-bodied to some extent. I have some disabilities, but I can get on with my day-to-day work, and I do have the support that I need. I am fairly light skinned, although I'm not white. And I rent. I'm not homeless. I have a space. I used to have my own property. Now I'm renting. And I think that's what else can I talk about with my privilege. My biggest privilege is the fact that I have an education, and as an autistic person, I still speak pretty reliably, but always not 100%. And I use that particular privilege to speak out for autistic people. And because I'm from the Pakistani community and I know the culture and the ins and outs of it, I feel with my education and understanding, I want to use my privilege to do better for my community.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. I don't think I'll go through so extensively in my own identity, but I can share that, of course, you saw in the intro, I'm white passing, so I'm visibly white. And that is something that means that I do not experience racism in the same way that people who are racialized, black, brown, do experience racism. I am autistic, so on this wheel, it's not so much a spectrum. We try to move away from that, and we'll speak later about that. So yeah, I could go on, but we're going to take you through to reflect. Yeah. You can look at the wheel and reflect yourself, but I think it's really highlighted through the quiz that we're going to share with you.
Yes. Before we go to that, I just wanted to add in one extra point there that racialized neurodivergent people, and I will talk about beyond just autistic people because we have more than one neurodivergencies on average. We are excluded from school, or we would have fewer qualifications. Many people will start university but not complete it. We're less likely to be identified as autistic people because we're racialized and our outwardly behavior is misinterpreted. And it's seen as aggression instead of stress. And that has been reported to us through the different lived experiences that we heard from. Reaching potential is very different to doing well. So we have lowered expectations and we have presumed incompetency and that's multiplied because we are of a colored skin, because we are either black or brown, and the perceptions of that, and also because we are artistic and how we present like that too. So it has a compounded impact on how we are perceived as being less than able to do things. And again, we heard that in our employment webinar as well. So for us to reach our potential is harder and more of a challenge. And it's seen that if you're doing well compared to what and compared to who, it really don't do justice to ourselves, or people don't do justice to us as well. Discriminated careers advice is one thing we also found as well, because of all these things, and it's because of our people's perceptions of us. And we're going to hopefully look at more in depth on those going forward.
Absolutely. And there's this notion of perception, and you know, a lot of people are autistic and don't look autistic. So that can be a hidden disability, just like people like myself have a hidden minority ethnic background because of the way that I look and the way that I speak. People will make assumptions, and we're really driving towards people understanding that those subtle differences and how people can people can be made assumptions of, and that can really impact what they can or cannot achieve in their lives.
Yes, thank you for that. That's such a very good point there, and a very good comparison as well. Now, we invite you to pause the video and scan the QR code. We've got a short quiz with a series of statements to which you would answer true or false. There'll be a score reflective of the structural barriers that you encounter, or on the other hand, don't encounter. We would like you to take this opportunity to reflect on how you connect with your privilege and how you use it to combat inequity and injustice.
So when we think what are disabled people, there's a question of what are we really talking about, and it's often defined as a personal problem rather than something in the context of society. The UN and UK definition is someone who has long-term physical, mental, or sensory impairments, and this includes autism. And it talks about the impairment interacting with their life that is personal, and often it stops there and doesn't consider the wider social landscape. The UN talks about the person and the attitudes and how they interact with daily life, which is very important. There are models of disability, frameworks that are political, economical, cultural frames of reference, ways of understanding disability. So here on the left, we've got the medical models approach. Her impairment is the problem. They should cure her and give her prosthetics. This is the most dominant model out there, mostly, that is medicalizing the problem. That disability is the same as an illness, with an idea that can be fixed by medicine or not. There's the eugenics model, which underpins sexism, racism, and ableism. So when we think about disability, there's a question of what are we really talking about, and it is also often defined as a personal problem rather than something in the context of society. The UN and UK definition of disability is someone who has long-term physical, mental, sensory impairments, and this includes autism. It talks about the impairment interacting with their life that is personal, and often it stops there and does not consider the wider social landscape. The UN and UK's definition of a disabled person is someone who has long-term physical, mental, or sensory impairments, and this includes autism. It talks about the impairment interacting in their life as a personal issue, and it often doesn't consider the wider social landscape. There are different models or approaches of thinking about disability, frameworks that are political, economic, cultural, and they're frames of reference and help us understand what disability is. There are four main models that I'm aware of. The eugenics model, which speaks about who should and shouldn't survive depending on what they can and cannot do. And that underpins sexism, racism, and ableism. There's the medical model, which I would say is the most dominant, which medicalizes a problem. It says that disability is akin to an illness, with an idea that it can be fixed by medicine or not. Then there's the charity model, and this is really around kind of social, personal disempowerment. This speaks about raising money for the poor disabled people. And then there's a social model which we support, which is made by disabled people for disabled people. And it's about empowering people and changing the environment.
Consider the context of where you live will influence how much ableism and racism you may or may not experience. Bronfenbrenner's Ecological and Active Model of Disability in 1979 states that the environment a person is in can either create or exacerbate the disability. We're not saying that people do not have impairments which can be taken away, rather, that often the world around us is disabling. If that ramp was there, then there would be no problem getting one's wheelchair into that building. Or if the power assist doors were working, we would be able to get through the doors of the kitchen or building that we want to go through. Speaking specifically about autism, it is not about denying that there are challenges and that even with enabling conditions that the experience could fully go away. Rather, we wish to talk about how the struggle can be minimized compared to being exacerbated. Since even when things are going well, it is possible for us to experience shutdown and or meltdowns because of innate differences or difficulties. And a good example of that is interoception. We will have a difference in the ability to understand how our body is feeling. So we might not be able to understand or be attuned to the signals our body is giving us. For example, for needing to go to the bathroom or needing water or eating. This difficulty in itself, or this difference in itself, has nothing to do with our surroundings. However, our surroundings can cause anxiety and cause difficulty, for which then this difference can be exacerbated and made more difficult.
It's just a vicious cycle, really, isn't it?
It is. So there is an impact on our surroundings. However, we innately have these differences. And that's why the social model of disability, I feel like, doesn't always talk about that. We inherently got these differences, but our systems in place, as you know, this lovely image we've got here shows how we are impacted by those around us. Interestingly, actually, I want to add that when we were talking to individual autistic adult autistic people, first thing that they talked about was their systems of support. And being an autistic person, being a minority group, from a minority group, they felt isolated because their own families or their own local communities did not understand what it's like to be autistic. And so the isolation starts right from the inner circle. That's what we hope to improve on and address. But then we've also got in our microsystems as well, and our mesosystems over here. And we're talking about going out in the neighborhood, going to the shopping market, the supermarket. You know, it gets worse and worse. And you've got your systemic, and then you've got your global difficulties that we see, and the issues that we have. They all impact us, the individual and it impacts their quality of life as well.
Thanks so much. So going to the next slide, with regards to autism and the history of autism, there can be a lot of misunderstanding, stigmatizing and stereotyping. The classic being the little white boy who's badly behaved and likes trains, or when glorified, is the scientific genius. The idea that it's a spectrum and those low on the spectrum can function relatively unsupported day to day, and that someone higher up on the spectrum needs more support or maybe non-verbal, etc. You may have seen that autism, in fact, looks a bit more like this.
So it's called a spectrum for a reason.
Yeah. So it's not something that we are on or something that we have, like an accessory or a disease. It's a part of us and makes us who we are. It's a dynamic disability showing up as a spiky profile, meaning both that a person who is autistic may develop strong skills and be higher than the average population in some ways, say being really good at verbal articulation, speaking well and clearly about complex things, but may be lower than the average population with other traits. For example, struggling with executive functioning, like deciding what to order in a restaurant or how to pack their bag in the morning. And dynamic means that it can vary from day to day or week to week. The way we operate, particularly with regards to the areas you see here, lead to struggles because the majority of the world around us is not set up to understand or support these differences.
Returning to racism. Racism shows up in a host of ways and has lasting impacts. It can include patronizing remarks, backhanded compliments, stereotyping, including assuming incompetence or a higher level tolerance for pain or more violent character. It can include minimizing or dismissing lived experiences because someone cannot relate to our experience of racism or our experiences of life in general.
White fragility is aligned with this: cultural appropriation, fetishizing or exoticizing, tone policing, and more.
Microaggressions are within all of this. Microaggressions are everyday actions that intentionally or unintentionally communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages towards a person or a group based on an aspect of their identity, for example, ethnicity, disability, gender. This is from a research paper by Sue in 2010, the link of which will be at the end in the references. They are broadly grouped into three themes: verbal, behavioral, and environmental. A quote that we picked up from one of our lived experience focus groups was quite powerful in encapsulating this as well in modern day Scotland for us or racialized autistic people. They said, and then of course, then there's the issue of microaggressions, comments about my hair, my accent, or my quirky behavior. They all add up, making me feel like I don't quite belong. And this also links back to our very first quote as well at the beginning. Microaggressions, in a way, can just be summed up as, in fact, the impact of them as being death by 1,000 cuts. And if we're living a life where we are being hurt and because of different aspects of our identity, it will impact our health and well-being.
Indeed, and that quote that we see there was a participant commenting on these issues of microaggressions on top of their struggle as an autistic woman. And we've got a video next up for you. So if you could click on this link, it will take you to the microaggressions video on YouTube, which I think is really helpful. I think the point here, like you said, death by 1,000 cuts, that microaggressions are covert. And here we see in the iceberg that there's overt racism, which is like obvious. And people might be like, oh, that person's so racist, or their behavior is so racist. And actually, there's a lot of covert racism, which people wouldn't call out as racism. And that's really what we're trying to highlight here. And it's not a surprise that microaggressions are one of the most common forms of discrimination in the workplace. So things that you may think are not a big deal do add up and are killing people, literally. So we've got this video for you that was made by Same Difference, and it's a really easy way to understand what we're talking about with regards to microaggressions. So click on the link, it's hyperlinked on the title, and we'll see you in a bit.
So here we have some examples of what racialized autistic people told us with regard to their experiences. One of the biggest challenges I've faced is the belief that autism is something that doesn't affect Black people. I can't count the number of times I've heard, "You're just overthinking. Black girls can't get autism like that." Or, "That's just how you are. Why do you need a label?" Another person told us, "Someone asked me if I get violent when I'm stimulated because, Black people are violent." Another one said, "I get that it's an intersection of cultures, but being autistic looks the same. I'm not more autistic because I'm Black." My challenge is sensory issues in the workplace, being misunderstood as being difficult. Many office environments are overstimulating, bright lights, constant noise, strong perfumes, but asking for accommodations can be seen as making a fuss. As a racialized woman, I'm already cautious about not being seen as demanding or high maintenance. Being disabled and racialized. The unwanted behaviors that were reported to us included but don't are not exhausted, are not limited to what we have here. We've seen a lot of stereotyping, being unable to explain themselves fully, One person explained that as though what's going on in their brain being difficult for them to articulate with mouth speak. Other things we found was that not being given responsibility for tasks that they're qualified to carry out. So again, presumption of incompetence. There was having their opinions discounted, particularly if they're women. They're not being taken seriously and their ideas in the workplace not being listened to. They found that they have been ignored or excluded, and that also includes under medical situations, seeing the GP or in the hospital. We've also had people talking about being recipients of inappropriate remarks or offensive jokes. This could be things like touching your hair, and mimicking accents, also just pathologizing their behaviors. We've also had experiences of people being subjected to violence as well. And that's like one of the extreme cases. So the physical environment can be a barrier, but also institutional and organizational barriers, which we hope to dismantle through education processes like this. We find that there are attitudinal barriers as well, particularly by line managers or people making decisions for us without listening to us or even believing us. There's also an information and communication barrier where we're not understood because of the way information is communicated to us. So the problem here is us facing these barriers, and instead of us being told we need to improve ourselves or go to therapy or have medication, it's rather that we need to turn the focus on the environmental barriers and changing them. So coming on to legislation and the duties of service providers, we're just going to look at an overview of three main pieces of legislation and policy that are intended to protect our rights and to improve our basic living outcomes and our to reduce discrimination. Basically, we have UNCRPD. Interestingly, not many professionals actually know or are aware of the UNCRPD. It's a convention that emphasizes accessibility and non-discrimination. It talks about independent living and equal participation in all aspects of society, including education, employment, and political life. And quite importantly, the UNCRPD talks about embodying nothing about us without us. It's a huge part of it. But when we're talking about, Olivia, you said about the charity model, a lot of that is about trying to help, people who are disabled, but not really engaging with them and empowering their voices. So the this UNCRPD is pretty much the opposite of that. It's empowering people and giving them their voices and telling them that they are valued and they matter and they should be an intrinsic part of daily life in society. Then you have the Equality Act 2010, where we have the protected characteristics, which should, in theory, protect us from discrimination within work and education as well as the public sector. The more people understand this, the more we are able to embody these rights within our policies in our organizations. And the more we will give power to people to understand where their rights lie and how they can uphold them. Then we have the public sector equality duty, where public bodies, this is targeted for public bodies and public services, they must eliminate discrimination, meaning being actively anti-racist, actively anti-ableist, where we have training and policies and procedures that will tackle this. So this is like a duty of service that's provided to the public. It should advance equality of opportunity and also foster good relations between different groups. So all of these pieces of legislation, they show that as a service provider, we are accountable for how we behave and how we work within an organization on a one-to-one level and on a structural and systemic level. Universal design. So another part of the solution or next steps of the solution is adapting our services. And at SEMA, we really talk about and promote universalism. So people would have seen the models of discrimination where we have inequality, equality, equity, and then we have the fourth one, we have the justice, where we don't want to have the barrier, let alone telling people they need to have to ask for reasonable adjustments. What we want ideally is a society where the need for reasonable adjustments is taken away because everything is just so open and accessible. So we need to ask our service providers, whether they're community-based or public services-based, like to open up opportunities which consider different culture and different needs. We need to think about how we can include flexibility and responsiveness according to the needs of the individual, whether it is cultural or based on disabled needs. We should address stereotypes about positive destinations when it comes to careers and schools and leaving and transitioning into adulthood. Actively listening to young people about their aspirations rather than tunneling their perceived good options. Now, this is something that was talked about and reported to us, and this is why we're talking about this here, is that it's more often a case of decisions being made about us for us, which is the complete opposite of, as I said, of the UNCRPD. Adapted services. So, what can universal design look like? At Scottish Ethnic Minority Autistics, we talk about universal design quite a lot because the point of removing the barriers is for us to enact justice in accordance to legislation and law and basic human rights. Examples of what we can do as service providers is open up opportunities which consider different culture and needs, include flexibility and responsiveness according to the needs of the individual, whether it is cultural or disabled needs. A good example is checking sensory environments. Often these adaptations don't have to actually cost much money, and it is just needing a different way of looking at things. And the best way to enact them or to consider what to do is by listening to the people you are trying to serve. We should address stereotypes and practice active listening and have the humility and curiosity to have our understanding challenged. Firestorm. So at Scottish Ethnic Minority Autistics, we talk about universal design quite a lot because it's the point of it is to enact justice and equal opportunities and equity for everyone in our communities. What would this look like? Opening up opportunities which consider different culture and different needs. For example, if you have a job opening, it doesn't have to be that one person has to fulfill one job role. You could split it up, looking at the requirements of the job, what is required, what is desired, and how a different person can do different aspects of the job. That then leads to the flexible approach, which we don't often see. Now, when we're talking about responsiveness and flexibility, we're also talking about the environment. For example, and talking to one of the our partner organizations, one of them told us that where they work, they are free to just bring out the prayer mat and do their prayers. And they are just left to do it as there's no questioning about what you're doing, why you need to do it, or needing a specific space. It's very much embedded in the culture of the organization, this openness. Another example would be the sensory checks, having an environment that is not too bright or too loud. Every organization, we believe, should have a sensory check to look at how inclusive and responsive their environments are. Now, looking at the other part of the environment is your cultural practices and attitudes within this environment that people are working in or taking services from. So, what we need to do is address stereotypes and practice active listening and have the humility and curiosity to have our understanding challenged so that we can then be more flexible and responsive to the people we are providing services to.
Thanks for that, Sophia. Other things we can do is deepen our awareness of racism and ableism through education, like this webinar and the other ones we have to provide, and have a look at the resources at the end. Also including trainings, so to reduce microaggressions and unconscious bias. We suggest that you call in behaviour that's problematic with assertive kindness, rather than shunning people away Other things you can do about it is through deepening your awareness of racism and ableism through education and training, so to reduce microaggressions, bias, and the barriers that we've talked about. So often people are enacting racist or ableist behavior and they're ignorant to it, and that is not their intention. And we need to, instead of calling them out and shunning them that you're a racist, in some cases that might seem necessary, but certainly the level that we're talking about, we want to bring people in so that they can learn that their behavior is problematic and that they've been conditioned with these biases and that they need to educate themselves and upgrade. We also talk about taking positive action to level the playing field for minority ethnic groups and autistic individuals. And that means systematically identifying and understanding your communities and what their needs are and making changes that sort of level up. You know, if you have evidence that you don't have you have a minority of racialized people or you have a minority of autistic people, you can take positive action to employ more people who are racialized, black or brown, or employ more people who are autistic. Learn and celebrate others' cultures. So, yeah, it becoming the new norm to celebrate and bring in other cultures from the ones that you know or that are dominant in your communities. Gain resources for translating materials and providing interpreters. So actually, you know, getting the basics sorted so that people can access your services. And ask and don't assume. So effective consultation is that active listening that Sophia spoke about. And lastly, build trust and challenge stigma. There's such a lack of trust in minority ethnic communities and in autistic communities of mainstream society and authority because we've been treated badly for so long. So building trust and fostering good relationships is key, and challenging stigma around, for example, autism within minority ethnic communities is really important too. So respecting that things might be stigmatized and treading carefully, but also challenging behavior that is stigmatizing minority ethnic communities and or autism.
So while we talk about all the positive actions that we can take to improve the life outcomes of racialized autistic adults and families in our Scottish society, we need to think about other considerations that will impact us. And these are topics that will be talked about in more depth with our other webinars. Co-occurring conditions and compound impact of lived experiences, identities, what it means by masking, code switching, and cognitive load, and the risk of burnout, which should be proactively addressed. These are the reasons why what we do is so important. We acknowledge that autistic people have a higher rate of having mental health difficulties, illnesses, suicide ideation, and even completing suicide. And the reason for that is because of the burden of the discrimination and not being believed or not having accessibility. So when we are wanting to improve our services for autistic adults, we need to consider the fact that racialized autistic adults have even more of a burden and have even more difficulties that we face that are not necessarily seen by wider society. So here's some final closing remarks from our focus groups and lived experience groups from the people that we spoke to. As one person told us in the focus groups, being autistic is generally viewed as incompetence in my culture. Now, we need to consider the internal difficulties and the isolation that racialized autistic people feel within their own families, cultures, and communities. And then on top of that, with the wider community, this is really important because it will stop them from trying to access support and in itself acknowledging their own differences and disability. This then warrants us to be much more compassionate and less judgmental towards racialized autistic people. When asked what can be done better or what they would like to see better, one person said in response, respect for different cultures and awareness of intersecting identities. The stigma as an autistic minority ethnic woman is threefold compared to a white neurotypical Christian woman, for example. We wouldn't have to work extra hard to prove our worth and that we're great at what we do when we're given the opportunity to thrive and be our genuine selves. So here we just see that there's layers of load that we are facing that needs to be unpicked, and we need the help for this, and we want service providers to understand the complexities that we experience for them to provide the best support and care they can for us. We just would like to add on some recommended reading, and there is plentiful material in this day and age on how to understand intersectionality. We have compiled a very, very short list of recommended reading for you to look at, to read and learn more about the experiences of being racialized and or autistic. We highly recommend you read Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and also Unmasked and the Autism and Neurodiversity Starter Pack by Stimpunks and Helen Edgar. And in particular, looking at intersectionality, we recommend Autistic and Black by Cara Allen Omiza, which gives life experiences of autistic Black people, both in America and UK.
Thank you for listening. Here's our reference page, where you can find links to the books and images that we've used, or the full titles. I'd like to thank the organisations Inspiring Scotland, the Adult Autistic Support Fund that has funded this and brought this project to life, Equality and Diversity UK, which gave us a deeper understanding of equality, and MECOP Minority Ethnic Carers at People Project, based across the whole of Scotland with their central office in Edinburgh, and the individuals Sophia, myself, Olivia, participants of SEMA's focus groups, Husna for her beautiful artwork, Emily Obrey for perspective on disability models, and Roma D'Angelo's work on anti-racism.
Thank you very much.